Hello all. In this video I thought it might be interesting to show how I went about combining two different wood species discreetly for a tabletop on one of my side tables. An exercise in using what's to hand if you like. I won't be showing the whole table build as I already have a video on that. I'll just concentrate on the tabletop here, but I will at the end show you the finished result. Whilst at my local timber merchant recently, buying a few rough sawn boards for chairs, I spotted a couple of decent lumps of Utile board ends in their scraps bin. A few cracks in them, so I got them for just a couple of quid. I haven't used Utile for a long time. If you've not used it before, it's very similar in grain and workability to Iroko, what they call a cross grain. I find it machines very well, but given its cross grain, it can be a handful to hand plane. Its rep was largely built on being a mahogany replacement, but it too may soon be as hard to get as mahogany. One of the lumps I had, this one I'm laboriously resawing here, was a good 60 odd mil thick. The other piece was around 50 mil. Although I'm settled on white beech and walnut as perfectly suited to my furniture style, it is nice to try varying colour timbers. Not least because ultimately, clients can order in whatever timber they want as much as is practicable, even if my recommendation is only white beech or walnut. So the 60mm lump has had a roughly 10mm board separated from it. This board I'm hoping will be enough to form a tabletop, leaving the two other lumps to be machined down to around 46mm for the frame pieces. With the 10mm board for the top planed, I'm contemplating the best way to add thickness to it. I was going to try just making the top as it is, just 10mm, but my design calls for 18mm for the side tables and 20 for the coffee tables. It's not a strength issue as my tabletops are small, it's purely an aesthetic thing. Annoyingly, measuring up, it's clear I don't have quite enough on this board to double it up for required thickness. In my stall though, I had a couple of slab ends of ash which has strong figure and would add a nice contrast to the Utile. This table is actually a trial for a new leg top joint, a sort of mason's mitre, so there's little point in going back to the merchants to dig for more suitable offcuts. I have a feeling this contrast will look just as good as a solid Utile top too. Off with the waney edges, then a couple of passes through the table saw to give me two small planks. Planed and thickness, I had just enough to give me an extra 8mm thickness, perfect when they're eventually mated to the Utile. This is one of the parts of the job I love, laying out your pieces to find a good complementary orientation. It's difficult to get just so when you're squeezing the maximum out of limited stock, but an attractive compromise can usually be found. Glue up next to make the Utile pair into a panel. I've said this before regarding panel glue up, but before you add glue, put them together and very lightly clamp to check your mating edges. If they're good, go ahead and glue, clamping only as tight as you need to keep them together. Good mating edges shouldn't need much pressure at all. The more pressure you add, the more you'll send things out of shape. You can use a number of widgets to keep the panels flat of course, but you shouldn't need to if you don't over tighten. A few hours later, glue dry, it's out of the clamps nice and flat. You can see the ash panel done in the same way in the background there too. My tabletop panels are designed with basically my small planer width in mind, so 240mm. This Utile panel was centre joined, but I'm removing from one side so the join line will be off centre when it forms the tabletop. Then a quick skim on the planer of the face to be glued shortly. One final thing before gluing the ash and Utile together is cutting little end strips from each end of the Utile. These will be flipped to the underside of the top to hide the ash from sight when looking at the table. So the grain is orientated correctly, hopefully disguising any joint. Each end strip is X and wide to its corresponding end. It'll go together like this in case you're wondering what I'm on about. Tidy. Trying for a nice even spread of glue, not too heavy, just good cover. I'm using Everbuild D4 PVA. I like D4 PVA for the tabletops and panels as it has a degree of elasticity, unlike the Cascamite glue I use for the frames, which is a rock solid bond. This is probably a good point to mention expansion and contraction. Over the width of the boards I use for my tabletops, it's not an issue, even between my rigid frames. What fractional movement there is, just a millimetre or so through all the four seasons, is more than absorbed by the natural flex in the timber making up the frames. They were designed this way. If I were to do, say, one of my coffee tables, but square instead of long and thin, it would need a countermeasure for expansion and contraction. This is something I'm working on behind the scenes so I can keep the look of my tables. Whether I nail that for the bigger tables, well, watch this space. I forgot to say, by the way, that, as mentioned earlier, the Utile panel has an off-centre joint. The ash I'm applying to the underside has a dead centre joint, so the joints are staggered in other words. Out of the clamps, I can add the Utile edging strips. Same D4 glue. I try and eyeball the grain lines as best I can, then they get their own clamping session. Once I had them clamped down, I also added clamps to pull them in too, but I don't have any shots of that. That then is it. Now it's a case of cleaning it up and preparing it to fit in the stretchers to complete the top. Lovely. As I square up on the miter saw here, you may notice the cracks I mentioned at the beginning show. These were subject to an epoxy pour a week or so before me starting this table. I mixed in a little copper bronze pigment, which is a real nice fit with the Utile. Jumping ahead a bit then to bring this to a close, here the panel is getting fit to the stretchers, which also doubles as an extension to the tabletop as well as the top section of the looping frame. The whole assembly gets the time consuming shaping and finishing process, which, as I said, I have other videos on already, so won't cover here. Instead, I'll put up a little gallery of the finished table so you can see how it looked when finished. I really like it. I may even offer it as a feature option. It's kind of nice when a piece has a sort of hidden detail or point of interest. So that's it. I hope this little exercise has been of interest to some of you and maybe given you some ideas to stretch out your resources and materials. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you aren't already. I ask for no support on this channel other than that, but the thanks button is there if you feel so inclined. Let me know your thoughts on the mix of materials below, and as always, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.